My first experience with Flatout Games titles was Calico, which I reviewed and loved. After that came Cascadia, which I also reviewed and loved, and it got my attention that maybe I should check out their other titles. So I bought Truffle Shuffle, which I have had for months, but still haven't played. A year ago I reviewed Verdant, which I loved and just got the published version in the mail the other day. I then got around to playing Point Salad on BGA and liked it well enough to convince Christian of Take Your Chits to use his connections to get me a copy of the Korean version. So now we're here with the latest game from what might be one of the most consistently good publishing groups in my library, Fit to Print. Fit to Print is a real-time spatial puzzle that has you splitting your time between grabbing tiles and eyeballing and figuring out what might fit on your page, and then actually physically putting them on your paper. And before the game begins, players decide on how much time to allocate for each round. Suggested 5 minutes for a nice relaxing round, which I found a little bit off because even with 5 minutes, I found it fairly frantic. Each player receives a centerpiece tile that can give them a benefit or bonus. Once the timer starts, players reach into the pile of tiles, grabbing a single tile at a time, then flip it face up and decide if it goes on their desk for their newspaper or back into the pile face up for someone else to potentially grab. And once you place the tile on your desk, it's stuck there. What players are trying to do in this phase is grab all the necessary components to lay out their daily newspaper. This grid grows each day, but they all have the same limitations. Tiles can't overhang the paper, can't overlap, and in order to score, have to follow certain placement conventions. And all within the scope of that predetermined time period, a player can choose to move on to the next phase, independent of everyone else. And that next phase involves them taking all the tiles that they've collected and set on their little cardboard desk, pulling them off and actually physically laying out their newspaper within the remaining time. There are 3 types of tiles: pictures, ads, and articles. Pictures can't be adjacent to each other, ads can't be adjacent to each other, and the same types or color of articles can't be placed adjacent to each other. Each article has either a happy or sad face or some combination of the two. This is used to measure the overall tone of your paper, and a perfectly balanced paper in terms of mood is not going to earn you any negative points for the round. At least in that category. Pictures score points based on the types of articles placed adjacent to them, and ads earn you revenue, a metric that earns you no points, but if you're in last place with the revenue at the end of the game, you automatically lose. Tiles can be placed either face up to earn points, or face down to simply cover up blank spaces. Once content, a player grabs the lowest number tile on the table and ends their round. And centerpieces for the next round are chosen by turn order in terms of who finished their paper first the previous round. Now here's the deal, there are a lot of polyomino style spatial puzzle games out on the market, and for good reason. People like that kind of thing. There's this whole Tetris nostalgic aspect to it, and spatial puzzles are just fun. So it was a bold move and interesting, I thought, when I noticed that all the tiles in this game are square. Sure, they're different sizes of squares, but that seems sort of limiting. But this is where Flatout Games shines. They box you in with certain decisions, and your creativity has to flow, and the puzzle has to be solved within those limitations. And for me, that's one of the reasons that I enjoy their puzzles so much. So you're dealing with just square rectangle tiles, but there are a number of placement restrictions that you can't deal with. You can't rotate the tiles. They have to be adjacent to different types of tiles or different colors, and it all is very restricting within this grid, but in the best possible way. And the fact that you kind of have to eyeball it at first, deciding which tiles to take, really offers a big opportunity for you to take some negative points each round. And on the surface, squares look nice and easy. There's a nice, comfortable looking grid, but in practice, that's not necessarily the case. What I couldn't help but notice when I played this game was that there is a lot of opportunity to earn negative points, which some people don't particularly love, myself included. And on top of it all, that timer is just oppressing because if you run out of time, that's it. You can't place any more tiles. Now, I've more or less come to terms with this aspect of the game, and while I'm not necessarily thrilled at the idea of having lots of potential penalties, I also really love the game Agricola, and I'm familiar with negative points. The game can also be very frantic, which is also another thing that could be off-putting to people. If you're familiar with games like Galaxy Trucker, or really any sort of real-time game, you're going to know whether or not you like this. But I'm really enjoying seeing a resurgence of real-time puzzle games, sort of like we saw in Galaxy Trucker, which was re-released recently, or Bullet Heart from Level 99 Games. You are confined to this time limit. And in that time limit, it's not just going absolutely crazy. You have to apply a certain amount of critical thinking to your decisions. It's niche, it's exciting, and for some people it really works. And for Flatout Games, it's a new element and something that works really well with their format. And for me, it caused Fit to Print to be engaging the entire playtime. And that playtime isn't super long. This game does not outstay its welcome when you've got each round lasting 5 minutes in terms of gameplay, and then you get into the scoring, which the scoring is a a bit of a thing on its own, but we'll get into that in just a second. The game has a few other options as well. You can add specific rules for each specific day or round, as well as individual player powers. Add that into the mix with being able to adjust the timer each time. The game is going to stay fresh for a long time. Even if you don't change any of those rules and you don't add in those elements, you still have a lot of variety with the tiles that you use, with the ones you choose, with the centerpiece tiles, and it's pretty darn fun. And so in the midst of this frantic race where you're grabbing tiles, trying to think and eyeball, will this actually fit onto my board, and then making the decision halfway through the round to dump your desk and actually physically lay everything out, you've got this frantic, exciting thing. And the slowest part actually is the scoring. Having to tally up your points and look over your opponent's board to make sure they didn't make any errors. That's what slows the whole game down, but it's not to the detriment of anything. If anything, it gives you a little bit of a breather before the next frantic round. There's this idea that you can just flip tiles, not rotate, flip them actually to the backside and use it to fill up blank space, even if you're not, it won't necessarily score you any points, but it will eat up space. And what that is just sort of type. You're throwing in words so that the newspaper that you run does not print with blank space on it. It's a cool thematic element to it that really plays well into the theme of this game, which is really cool, especially with the woodland creature art. All of it is like right up my alley. The idea that you get to run a newspaper, that's pretty cool. Tool's art with the woodland creatures and the different newspapers with their different names, pretty cool. Real-time aspect to it, I love it. The puzzle aspect, really enjoy it. For me, Flatout Games has knocked another one out of the park, and they continue to have that Midas touch, which really reminds me I should probably actually get Truffle Shuffle to the table to give it a shot. Everything else I've liked, so why not that? Now, granted, there are elements to this game that people are not going to love. The real-time aspect, the frantic nature of everything, the random pulls that you might get, the negative points. There are things in this game that people may not enjoy. For me, it all comes together into a package that I really enjoy. Every element that this game has on display, aside from maybe the slowdown for counting scores and everything, like everything fits together super well. And while it may not be the absolute perfect game, it's pretty darn good. And it continues with the high level standard that I have for Flatout Games titles, and continues their tradition of doing really well. And ultimately, as always, I'm excited to see what Flatout Games has in store for us in the future. Thank you so much for watching. I'm Daniel Robison with Plumpy Thimble. Feel free to follow me on pretty much all social media, TikTok, Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, YouTube, all of that.